Hey, I'm here with David Eby, who is the MLA of Vancouver Point Grey with the NDP and is also the official opposition for housing, which is what we're here to talk about today. So thank you, David, for
thanks for coming, Steve.
So tonight we losing this fight. Oh, help our souls tonight. Is no one on our side who's gonna help our souls tonight. No one here to help.
All right, so basically, I mean, there's obviously a lot of news. It's a hot topic in Vancouver. A recent article by RBC Bank called Vancouver Real Estate Dangerously Unaffordable. BBC News has called Vancouver Real Estate a freak show. And a recent study from International Housing Affordability Survey said Vancouver is the most unaffordable in all of North America. Canadians are in more debt now than ever before, and incomes are not going up with the home prices. So with that being said, tell me right now, what is the provincial government doing right now to kind of stop this? Or
Yeah, I mean, great question. So these opinions are really starting to pile up. You listed a bunch of them there. Just in the last week, we've had Bank of Nova Scotia, National Bank, CIBC all weigh in saying that the real estate market is really scary here. And scary for a couple reasons, I think. One is the potential for a crash, which could be devastating for families, as you say, that are highly leveraged, that have borrowed everything they can to get into the market. And also the possibility that, okay, maybe we're hooking into the international market here and we should be looking at international prices as a guideline, Manhattan, London, Singapore, Hong Kong, in which case prices could still significantly increase. What does that mean for the future of the city? And so in that context of potential crisis, either in a crash or continued escalation of prices, the provincial government has been weirdly absent from the issue. They have taken some action. They said that they're going to track international speculation in the housing market by asking people to check a box on their land transactions.
how accurate do you think that's going to be? Is that that's like a self-regulated thing, right? Like,
yeah, well, I think it's crazy. You know, I think it's probably the least effective way to measure international speculation in our housing market, because there's actually a very serious form called the FINTRAC reporting form. That's the anti-money laundering form that is supposed to be filled out to say this money's not coming from Canada, that has not been filled out properly, and that actually, unfortunately, audits of many real estate agencies, it was 55 of 85 that were audited by the federal government agency, weren't filling out these forms properly. So even the really serious forms about is this money international aren't being filled out properly.
And I
so this checkbox I can't imagine.
I can see that too, like just being like in the front lines of the real estate offices, like it just seems kind of like a thing that you do, and it's kind of like whatever, like, oh, okay, what's your occupation? And you just kind of half-ass it.
Yeah, I mean, the mechanism that's been suggested that I think is most effective is to use the income tax system. Are you paying your worldwide taxes in British Columbia or not? It's a very straightforward question, and matching that up with who's buying real estate. And for people, and really I think it's a much better metric than are you a permanent resident or a citizen or a visitor. If you're paying your worldwide taxes in BC, you're helping pay for the schools and the hospitals and the roads, you're contributing in a very significant way to our economy. You're working here, your family's here. But if you're just buying property here and you're paying your taxes somewhere else, you have a couple unfair advantages. First is you're not paying the same tax rate that everyone else is here. And also you're benefiting from all of these public services that are increasing the value of the property, but you're not pitching in yourself. So that's the metric that I prefer, and it's much easier to measure, and it's very black and white, and it's much harder to fraud if you're paying your taxes here or not. So I much prefer that. But anyway, the provincial government proposed that. They've banned something called shadow flipping, which is they've created a mechanism where you can't assign a contract of sale that's completed to someone else without notifying the original seller and returning the proceeds to the original seller. But pre-condo sales are exempted from that, so it's a partial ban. And that's all that I can think of that they've done in market housing. But I mean, it's really, in terms of what's actually happening out there, is little or nothing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm just kind of going off based on what you said. I see that they've also, they limited the property transfer tax on new homes up to $750,000.
Right. For first-time home buyers.
Yeah, exactly.
So first-time home buyers are already exempted, but they increased the limit, and the idea for many people that their first home is going to be $749,000 is a bit of a joke. When you think the average income and household income in Metro Vancouver is the median income in Metro Vancouver is $77,000 for a household.
Yeah, but so let's talk about that then, because isn't the property transfer tax still on resales for first-time home buyers still only goes up to 475,000.
I think that's true.
Yeah, so I mean, and if you look at the stats, I mean, obviously you don't have to buy in downtown Vancouver, but if you want to buy a one bedroom in downtown Vancouver, your average selling price is now 525,000.
That's right.
So-
and you know, people will hear you say that in the roller eyes and say, well, why do people have to buy in downtown Vancouver? Well, the reality for most people is that that's obviously not going to happen. And so they're looking at other areas, but they also need transit in order to be able to get to work. And if they can't get transit, they're going to be driving. And you can see on the roads what's happening is people are actually moving out of Vancouver. They're moving into the suburbs. They're driving into their jobs in Vancouver. The roads are jammed.
Yeah.
There's huge traffic problems. But also we're seeing fairly significant price spikes all the way out the valley as well.
Yeah.
And so it's not really solving the problem to simply say, oh, well, just move up to the suburbs. It's creating additional problems. And also the housing is becoming increasingly unaffordable in the valley as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I just saw something on the news the other day where, I mean, if you look a year ago, nobody was buying Langley townhouses. And I saw now that one of the developers has actually had a raffle basically giving out spots so someone could wait in line to buy a pre-sale townhouse in Langley.
Yeah.
And I think that is totally unheard of even a year ago.
Yeah, the market is really bizarre right now, and one of the interesting numbers that I've seen is the fact that the inventory is so low, the number of listings. I think a lot of people who are thinking about selling their homes have decided not to sell, to wait and see what happens. When you have prices increasing 5 or 10% a month in some places, then if you can just hold on to your place for another month and not sell, then that's an extra $5,000 or $10,000 or $20,000 in the sale price. And so people are refusing to list, or they're worried if they do list and sell, that the market's moving so quickly they won't be able to get in again after they sell. And so the inventory of places for sale has gone right to the basement because the uncertainty of the market is very high right now.
Yeah, no, and I have clients the same thing where, you know, they've sold and now they're basically in a dogfight to try and find something.
Yeah.
And we're also seeing is a lot of people that are selling their homes here in Vancouver or in the Lower Mainland, and then they're either going to like the island or they're going to the interior. But I mean, I was just speaking with another client that basically he's looking to buy a house in Victoria, and he said he's lost out on 3 offers now, but each time it's got like 20 offers over in Victoria.
Yeah.
So
It's exactly what's happening in Victoria. And you can see the money, and people say, oh, this international money, this speculative money is mostly in West Vancouver, the west side of Vancouver. And that's true. But the money spreads very quickly. So when you drop this huge amount of international money in the west side of Vancouver and West Vancouver, that money, those people who lived in those homes move east. They move a few blocks east, and they bring that money that they took from the international speculators over with them, and that money pushes east all the way out the valley. In Victoria, as you say right now, they're beginning to see 2 things. One is the money coming from Vancouver as people sell their homes here and bring it to Victoria, to a more affordable place, driving prices up. But also, they're beginning to see international investors as well in Victoria. The realtors are advertising their ability to sell homes directly in, for example, mainland China. And so that people thinking of selling their homes should do that in order to get a higher price.
Yeah, no, I have seen a lot of that. Yeah, I think it is totally just like a ripple effect. I mean, I like know realtors in all sorts of different areas, and it's everywhere. It's not just like Vancouver, it's Langley, it's Tsawwassen, it's Ladner, it's South Surrey, and it's everywhere, and it's very evident who is buying them or who's bidding up people to go over what they can afford, right?
Yeah, it's a really serious issue when as someone who lives locally with local wages and local taxes, you're competing with someone that's paying with a different currency that hasn't depreciated 30% like the Canadian dollar has, who's living in a different tax regime where they have different levels of taxes, which are in some cases almost non-existent. And so you're going head to head with people who are also buying housing as an investment, as a place to park their money temporarily, in order to provide a hedge against uncertainty in their own economy. And so, I mean, it's really hard to compete with that kind of mindset.
Yeah, exactly.
And
So
that kind of like setup, financial setup.
do you feel that the provincial government right now at this moment is doing enough?
No, I don't. You know that there's a couple things that they could do tomorrow if they wanted. There are loopholes in the property transfer tax they need to close. They need to use the income tax system to start tracking who's buying property in Metro Vancouver and not paying taxes here. And how do we address that issue? And our suggestion is initially that we put in place an additional property tax that people who are not paying income tax here would have to pay if they buy a property here. It's a very modest tax. It's 2%. No one's suggesting that it would collapse.
Are you talking
international
about the property surcharge?
That's right, yeah. This is the idea that came out of the Sauder School
Yeah.
of Business. We think it's a good one. We put it forward in private members bill. It would raise $100 million a year in Vancouver alone for affordable housing initiatives, but it would also give us really reliable numbers about how serious is this international money problem. And for all of the reasons of government policy, restricting or eliminating or ending this conversation that can lead quickly to racism, and dealing constructively with the issue of people buying property here who aren't paying taxes here, we should do it.
Yeah.
And you can answer it. We're not looking at hydro records and trying to figure out, oh, maybe this place was empty, maybe it wasn't, there's a big debate about it, or like, this person checked the box or they didn't check the box. It's none of that. It's very straightforward. And I really think the province has an obligation to do that because there is an ugly side to this debate. And we have an ugly history of racism here. And so with evidence and with clear numbers that are based on taxes instead of place of origin, I think we can really get past a lot of that.
Yeah, and I think the blame is being put not properly on foreign investors, and people are saying that it's a race thing. I don't think it is. It's not. I don't think it's their fault. It's the lack of the government to take the proper steps that need to be taken in order to limit that. Like, I mean, if I was living over in China and I had the opportunity to get my money out into beautiful Vancouver, I would do the same thing, right?
Absolutely. And it's not just that. It also when the discussion focuses on race, it causes us to miss other issues. So there's a guy named Lawrence Fink, who's the head of BlackRock, the world's largest investment firm, $4.3 trillion under management, American money, Russian money, Chinese money, UK money under management. And he was the one who was presenting to a conference of the world's investors in Singapore saying, buy condos in Manhattan, buy condos in London, England, buy condos in Vancouver, don't buy gold.
Yeah.
And that was a real eye-opener, I hope, to the people of Metro Vancouver when the head of the world's largest investment firm is saying buy condos in Vancouver. If they put just 0.1% of their clients' portfolios into Vancouver real estate, literally billions and billions of dollars coming into our housing market, just speculative money. And so you can say, oh, it's the issue with China, it's the problem with all of the Chinese investors moving their money out of that uncertain economy, but it's not just Chinese money. It's international investors and speculators from around the world. And we need to accept that, understand it, and focus on that, really.
Yeah, and I've been through personally like a lot of like houses and condos where someone's gone and bought them in, say February, March, and today, here in June, they're relisted. They haven't done anything to them. They're just relisted and they're selling them for an extra $100,000 profit in two or 3 months.
That is some really scary activity, that kind of flipping activity, that speculative activity that can really, especially when people are running multiple properties, or they're flipping before they have to close the deal, it can be a real problem in terms of the whole thing collapsing really quickly.
So why do you think that the provincial government is so resistant to doing this property surcharge?
Well, I've got my theories, and one of them is that the government is, in my opinion, very captured by the development and real estate industry. So the chief fundraiser for the premier is Bob Rennie, who's a condo salesman and who personally takes home thousands and thousands of dollars per condo sold, right? And so he's been very clear. He doesn't want any tax on international speculators. He doesn't want that activity to end, and I understand that. I understand his perspective on it. I just disagree with it. The problem is he's the premier's chief fundraiser.
Yeah, so that's I guess something I want to talk to you about. I just saw that the big real estate companies and property tycoons have donated over $12 million to the Liberal Party. Many people are saying it's negatively influencing the government's decisions. So just want to get
I think so. I mean, I absolutely think that's the case. There's really no other explanation I can come to about why they're not taking action. Today, the cover of the Vancouver Sun, people in Metro Vancouver united, all ages, all income levels, in anger about the housing issue, and they blame politicians in action primarily for the issues we're facing. And yet the government still missing in action. And the only reason I can think of is that their donors, their political donors, don't want to see any kind of activity to restrict the international speculation that's happening in our market.
I agree with you totally. I just see like we've talked about earlier, that many foreigners using tax loopholes when selling their homes, such as claiming to be residents of Canada, so basically just taking off that resident of Canada in the real estate forms, so they can avoid paying the 25% tax surcharge.
Yeah, I mean, there's the issue of the homeowner's grant. There's the issue of the capital gains exemption for your primary residence when you sell. There are lots of tax benefits to owning property that government has put in place to incent people to buy a home rather than to rent, that are passing apparently uncritically to property investors and speculators. People who are buying property not as a place to live in, but as an investment. And so when you pass those tax benefits through, those incentives to, it causes those speculators to choose housing as an investment rather than some other investment. It incents them to make this problem worse, and it's such a problem that that's the case.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw that. I think that's something you were talking about with that article by some Vancouver lawyers, basically just saying that make some reforms to property transfer, suggested that anything real estate should be immediately cross-checked with Immigration Canada and the Canada Revenue Agency to ensure that all the property taxes are being paid.
Well, here's a great example. So the city of Vancouver did a hydro study that found that there were more than 12,000 vacant condos in the city of Vancouver, probably more than 10,000 vacant condos in the city of Vancouver, almost 12% of the housing stock in condos vacant, year-round, no electricity used. Now, it would be really easy for the provincial government to map that up against who's claiming the homeowner exemption grant. You're talking about, $6 million in potentially evaded taxes. There's just no interest in doing that, and I don't understand why. I don't understand why they don't want to close the loopholes in the property transfer tax around big commercial properties that are selling for hundreds of millions of dollars and the property transfer tax isn't paid. But if you buy a condo here in Vancouver as a family trying to make a go of it here, you have to pay the property transfer tax if you've owned a property before. So, all of these things that just don't make any sense in our housing market, and the provincial government might asleep at the switch.
Yeah, exactly. I want to kind of start to wrap it up and kind of get some more of your opinions on basically what kind of your suggestion you would do right now, if you were in government. So in your opinion, I know we've talked about it, but how do we get Vancouver prices back down to reality, to within reach for your average family, or is it too late?
Well, there are two clear markets to talk about. One is detached housing and one is condos.
Yeah.
And in terms of detached housing, the house prices would have to come down by half, or household incomes would have to double in Metro Vancouver in order to reach the affordability levels of Toronto. So that's a pretty major collapse of the detached housing market. I don't think anybody wishes for that because it would be absolutely devastating for so many highly leveraged families. Really what we need is the government to do a couple things. One is to manage the increases that are continuing as a result of the international money coming in, and to do that through encouraging people to invest in other things other than our housing by putting taxes in place. And so we have that proposal that came forward from the Sauder School of Business about putting an additional property tax in place on people who don't pay their provincial taxes or their taxes here in British Columbia. So that's the first proposal. The second is we need to have a commitment. The model I really like is the government of Singapore. Here's a government where in the 60s they had a huge population living in shanty towns, in sort of squats and this kind of thing. And they said it's a very small island. It's highly dense, millions of people, way more dense than here. And they said, we're going to make it a priority to have affordable home ownership for Singaporeans. That will be our government priority. And what they've done now, in 2016, they have 80% of their population are homeowners.
Yeah.
They have affordable housing for people who live there, even though they have this little tiny island that's a highly desirable place for people to buy property, that if I was to go buy property there, it would be highly unaffordable.
Yeah.
But for Singaporeans, because the government's committed to it, they have massive public housing builds by government that are built for Singaporeans, are only available to be purchased by Singaporeans.
Yeah.
And they also have a tax structure in place that makes it less affordable for international people to buy in the real estate market. They've managed their housing market so that it actually supports the economic development of Singapore, that people are able to live and work there. And what we're doing here is just letting it run wild so that people can't live and work here, and it's really hurting our local economy, except for the real estate, financial, and construction industries. And once the music stops on the real estate here, and everyone agrees that eventually it will stop, those industries are really going to struggle. And then what do we have left?
Yeah.
What is our well-rounded, diversified economy here? And that's a really important, serious question that we haven't spent a lot of time on.
Yeah, and that's something that I want to quickly touch on, is basically that a lot of people are saying that the provincial government's lack of jumping in, or even the federal, is because the market is so volatile that basically our economy right now is being propped up on Vancouver and Toronto real estate. And so kind of any intervention could potentially, cause just a major potential, like I think
Yeah,
there's a
absolutely.
recent report claims that a 15% price reduction in Vancouver real estate would leave 13% of mortgages underwater. So I mean, how do we
This is-
make these changes without potentially?
Absolutely. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that keeps and should hopefully keep the regulators up overnight. And they really have let this problem go on far too long.
Yeah.
People in Metro Vancouver are way too far in debt, and even a small interest rate increase is going to result in some pretty
Exactly.
devastating consequences for families.
Yeah.
So that's a major issue. I think that one is arresting the continued price increases so that we don't continue down this path that we're going by
Yeah, so
taxing
slowly.
the international money, right? So, and ideally manage that demand side, and then also on the supply side, looking at how we can start building rental housing and housing that is affordable to people who live and work here through government intervention, active government involvement. In producing housing is going to be critically important. And so, just one example, universities and colleges aren't allowed to borrow money to build student residences.
Yeah.
If they were allowed to borrow that money to build student residences where the rents actually pay for that mortgage and cover all the costs, then they would create tens of thousands of units of rental housing across the province, and that would take a huge amount of pressure off the rental housing market. So it's ideas like that that we need to be looking at, and ensuring the government is dedicated and focused on the issue of creating affordable housing for people, because right now they're not focused on that.
What do you say to the people that say it's all supply and demand?
I agree. The demand that we're facing right now is pretty clearly, because incomes are so disconnected from prices, the demand's coming from outside Metro Vancouver.
Yeah.
And so we need to deal with that demand issue. The supply issue is a very serious one. We don't have a supply of rental housing. We're not building rental housing. We don't have a supply of affordable housing for people who live here. I think we need to figure out ways that we can do that. And I think that's actually the job of government. And unfortunately, this government doesn't think that's their job.
Interesting. What's next for you and your team?
Well, we're looking to the May 2017 election. We're in opposition.
Yeah.
So our housing ideas, as much as we like them, as much as lots of people like them, including 35 economists in Metro Vancouver, they are just that. They're ideas, they're not laws, they're not policies, they're not in place. And so we need to get into government to make that happen, or we need to ramp up the pressure on the provincial government so that they act. And to tell you the truth, I would really like it to see the provincial government act tomorrow and
Yeah.
to take this issue away from us for the election. Just do something, because as each day passes, this problem gets worse.
Yeah.
And I really want them to solve this problem, or at least to show some interest in solving this problem, to get some smart people together and say, what can we do about this? But we're not even at that stage. So I do hope they deal with it. If they don't, it'll be a major issue in the election, and we'll be pushing hard on it.
Yeah, I think you picked the right topic, because I know that a lot of Vancouverites, basically everyone is really passionate about this.
Absolutely,
And I think
yeah.
everyone's kind of fed up that there is no action being taken right now.
That's right.
So I mean, ultimately, what are you hoping to come for the 2017 election done?
Well, hopefully by then we've seen some real and substantive action from the provincial government, because we've been putting so much pressure on them. But if not, housing will be, I guarantee it, housing will be the number one issue. It'll be the number one issue because there's been a crash. It'll be the number one issue because the price increases have continued, and people are even less able to live in Metro Vancouver a year from now than they are right now. And so it will be a major issue. We'll make it a major issue, and people will be voting on it.
Yeah, it's good. Fighting for the people, I like it.
Now, right on.
Awesome. Okay, thanks a lot, David.
Yeah, nice to
Appreciate it.
meet you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for coming.
Yeah, likewise.